The smoke-filled cantina on Proxima Station reeked of exotic alcohols and desperation. Captain Jake "Lucky" Morrison sat across from Zix Thera, a four-armed Velcarian crime lord whose scales shifted colors with his mood, currently a dangerous shade of crimson. Between them lay the stakes of the most audacious bet in the sector. Dr. Kethvar, a brilliant Thylorian scientist, bound in quantum restraints and looking thoroughly miserable. "Your move, human!" Zixathera hissed, his translator crackling with static. The holographic cards floated between them, displaying the ancient galactic game of Nexus, part poker, part chess, and entirely lethal when played for such stakes. Jake studied his hand, his weathered face betraying nothing. At 43, he'd smuggled everything from weapons to refugees across half the galaxy, but he'd never gambled for a sentient being before. The Thylorian scientist had been captured while researching a cure for the plague of Andromeda, a disease that was slowly consuming human colonies on the outer rim. Without Dr. Kethvar's research, millions would die. The rules were simple. Winner takes all, loser. Well, losers in Zix Thara's games rarely walked away. "Interesting proposition you made earlier," Jake said, casually adjusting his cards. "My cargo ship, my crew's freedom, and my own neck against one skinny scientist. Most would call that foolish." Zix Thara's scales flickered to orange. Amusement. "Most would. But humans are known for their peculiar decision-making processes." Dr. Kethvar looked up at Jake with large, multifaceted eyes that reflected fear and confusion. The Thylorian's telepathic abilities were blocked by the quantum restraints, but Jake could read the alien's expression well enough. The scientist was wondering why this scruffy human smuggler would risk everything for a stranger. Jake had wondered the same thing when he'd received the encrypted message from the Resistance. But then he'd remembered his sister's colony on Kepler 442b, slowly dying as the plague spread through their settlements. He'd remembered the children's faces in the last transmission before communications went dark. "You know," Jake said, placing a card face down, "humans have this saying, 'The house always wins.' But we also have another one. Fortune favors the bold." The game progressed through 7 rounds. Zix Thera was skilled. His species had been playing probability games for millennia. But Jake had something the Velcarian didn't: desperation tempered by hope, and a lifetime of reading faces across smuggling deals gone wrong. In the 5th round, Jake noticed something. Zix Thara's scales shifted to a pale blue whenever he drew a high-value card. The tell was subtle, barely a flicker, but Jake had built his career on noticing what others missed. The 6th round came down to a single decision. Jake could play "It's safe, likely lose," and watch Dr. Kethvar disappear into Zix Thara's slave markets. Or he could go all in on a bluff that would either save millions of human lives or get him killed in the next 30 seconds. He thought of his sister again, of the research data locked in the Thylorian's brilliant mind. "All in," Jake announced, pushing his remaining chips forward. Zix Thera's scales flickered through several colors: surprise, calculation, then settling on a confident green. Bold, human, but foolish. He matched the bet. The final cards were revealed. Jake's hand was mediocre at best, a configuration that might win against an amateur, but against Zix Thara's obvious confidence, it seemed suicidal. But Jake wasn't betting on his cards. He was betting on human intuition, pattern recognition, and the ability to take calculated risks that seemed insane to more logical species. "Read them," Zixthera commanded, his scales now a victorious gold. Jake flipped his cards slowly, one by one. The crowd that had gathered gasped. His hand was even worse than it appeared. Zixthara's laughter filled the cantina, a sound like grinding metal. "And yours?" Jake asked quietly. Zixthara revealed his hand with a flourish. It was impressive, a configuration that should have guaranteed victory. Should have. "Nexus Rules, subsection 7, Jake said calmly, pulling out a battered tablet and displaying the ancient game regulations. When played on stations within human-colonized space, the desperate gambit clause applies. A player who bets everything on a losing hand while fighting for the lives of others receives a luck modifier." The cantina fell silent. Zixthara's scales cycled rapidly through colors of confusion and rage. "That's a human addition to the rules," the crime lord snarled. "That's the beauty of human-colonized space," Jake replied, standing slowly. "We change the rules when the old ones don't serve justice." The modifier was real. Humans had indeed convinced the Galactic Gaming Commission to add it after a series of incidents involving desperate colonists. It was rarely invoked, almost never relevant, but Jake had memorized every obscure regulation in the sector. His terrible hand, modified by the clause, now beat Zixthera's. Chaos erupted. Zixthera's guards reached for their weapons, but the cantina's automated defense systems, programmed to enforce gaming regulations, activated. Energy fields separated the combatants. "Dr. Kethvar," Jake said, activating the release sequence for the quantum restraints. "We're leaving." As they walked toward the exit, the Thylorian scientist looked at Jake with something approaching awe. "You risked everything for someone you've never met. Your species' capacity for irrational altruism continues to baffle xenobiologists across the galaxy." Jake grinned, his hand resting on his blaster as Zixthera's furious roars echoed behind them. "Doc, there's nothing irrational about saving lives. That's just what humans do. We change the game when the stakes matter." 6 months later, Dr. Kethvar's cure saved 17 human colonies, but in the cantinas and gambling dens of the Outer Rim, they still told the story of the human smuggler who won the impossible bet, not through luck or skill, but by refusing to accept that some games couldn't be won. After all, humans had always been very good at changing the rules.